This lecture is about how we evaluate play. So after we have observed children and collected data about the play that they're exhibiting, then we need to take that information and do something with it. Professionals who work with young children are busy people, and they do not have time to be observing and collecting data unless there's some sort of purpose for it. So the purpose might be for your district or to a reporting agency, might be for report cards or family conferences, or to create more appropriate activities, or think about how to alter your classroom or your instruction or your own teacher behavior. But you should be doing something with that information that is useful to the children in your care. So this lecture is about what do we do with information that we collect about children's play through observation. So once you collect your data and use it to engage in the reflective process, and that is what was discussed in the video on the previous slide, is the importance of collecting data and then using it to reflect on what you could be doing differently, what you are doing well. So when we're thinking about play specifically and the types of play that we discussed in our types of play lecture, there are some reflection questions that are good ones to ask ourselves. So after we have collected that observational data, either through the structured methods of a checklist or a running record, or using unstructured methodology, always making sure that we are engaging in systematic observation, then we need to sit down and think about the data that we've collected. And hopefully we have also collected objective data that is factual and visible, not written down things that are our own opinion, that are subjective and biased. Because if we have collected good, high quality, reliable, valid, systematic, objective data, then we can engage in interpretation of that data that is fair and reasonable and accurate to children's skills and abilities. So some questions that are useful to ask ourselves after that good data is collected is, do we see children engaging in appropriate play for their age? So again, we don't know that exactly yet. We're going to start working on that in our next lecture when we start talking about infant and toddler play. But when we get that information, once we've gone through those age understandings of what types of play children should be exhibiting, are they doing things that are age typical, that are appropriate for their age? So, if we observe a 2-year-old and they're spending a lot of time in solitary play, that's okay, because that's what toddlers do a lot. If we see a school-age child who still is not engaging in constructive play, that perhaps is a, form that's potentially a concern, right? Because constructive play is something that even preschoolers can do. So is their play age appropriate? Also, are children regularly engaging in mature forms of play? So maybe a school-age child is doing dramatic play, which is age appropriate, but they are not using objects symbolically. Maybe they are struggling to play with other children in their dramatic play. So they're exhibiting dramatic play, which is age appropriate, but they're not doing the higher level, more sophisticated versions of that play or the more mature forms of it. So that's something that we can reflect on when we're looking at children's play. We can also ask ourselves, is a child missing a certain element to their play? So I worked in a classroom where there were several children who were on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, and there were just certain things they didn't do. So one little boy didn't play constructively with objects. He just kind of rolled them back and forth. So if he was using cars, he wasn't using them to pretend like the car was driving or to build ramps for the cars. He just would lay on his side and roll the cars back and forth. There was another child who used dramatic play objects, but not in an actual dramatic play scenario. So he would pick up the phone and say, "Hello, are you there?" but then repeat that behavior over and over again rather than incorporating it into a dramatic play sequence or opportunity to interact with other children. So are children able to do some things in their play, but maybe not other things? And how can we encourage them to fill in the gaps of things that might be missing? And that leads us to the last question. After I have reflected on the data that I've collected, and the questions that I gave you to think about as reflective questions are just examples of the kinds of questions. Maybe you did the playfulness scale and the child does not seem playful, or you did the PIPs and it seems like the child is being neglected or rejected. What are we going to do with that data? What kind of interventions can we design that will help children to grow and develop and use this observational data to its best advantage? And that's what we're going to talk about on the next slides, is how we can create goals and objectives for children, how we can take those goals and objectives and turn them into classroom opportunities and activities. You've collected the data and spent some time interpreting it, determining what your intervention should be. And again, remember that this interpretation and intervention should be based on the data that you collected, and importantly, it should be based on good, high quality, objective data. So once you have determined that an intervention is needed and you've conceptualized what that intervention might look like, the next step is to create goals and objectives. So goals and objectives can be for individual children, or they can be for a whole class of children. It just depends on what data you collected and what intervention you have determined is needed. So goals are first. And goals are typically a statement that is kind of general. So it doesn't give specific things that you want a child to improve on. It gives general things that you want a child to improve on. And typically when we're making those general statements, we are focusing on developmental domains or academic disciplines. So we might want a child to improve their social skills. We might want them to improve their emotional skills, or their language skills, or their motor skills, or their cognitive skills, or their creative skills. If we're thinking about academic disciplines, we might want them to improve their literacy, their numeracy, their social science, their natural science, their physical education, or their art skills. So very broad and overarching. If I were coming into your classroom and you had asked me to implement an intervention and you showed me a goal, I wouldn't really be able to do much with that goal. I wouldn't know exactly what it was that you wanted me to do with the children in your care. I would need something more specific, but a goal is a good place to start. It orients me. It says, okay, we're going to focus on social skills. This child has something going on with their social skills that we're going to need to improve on, or this child has something going on with their reading skills that needs to be improved upon. And once I have that general orienting statement, then I can move to creating a more specific plan for what exactly it is that I want to see the child do. What specific thing about social skills is it that I want the child to work on? What specific thing is it about literacy skills or reading skills that I want the whole class to be working on? And that is our objectives. So first we create goals, and then as described on the next slide, we create learning objectives. After you've developed general goals for what you would like to help a child to work on or a class of children to work on, next up is to create objectives. So as I was saying on the previous slide, there's not a whole lot you can actually do with a goal. So a goal is a good orienting start, but it doesn't tell us specifically what we need to work on with the children in our care. For that, we need to create objectives. So objectives are specific statements. So rather than just being general, the child will work on social skills, or the child will work on literacy skills, or the child will work on creativity skills, this is going to dig in and tell us specifically what in social development or literacy development or creativity development we want the child to be working on. So we need to really drill down. Is the child needing to work on playing longer? Are they needing to work on sharing materials? Are they needing to work on being able to insert themselves in a play scenario? What is it specifically about social development that we want the child to do better with? So we're going to talk a little bit more about what needs to be specifically in an objective on the next slide, because objectives are often referred to as SMART. It's an acronym that helps remind you of what things should be included in an objective, but just to get us started, you want to make sure that your objective has the behavior or skill that you want children to be working on or exhibiting, what exactly you're intervening related to. And then you also want to make sure that you have something in there called the criterion for performance or success. So this is how often or how frequently you want that child to be able to do something. So if we go back to our goal examples from the previous slide, let's say for social development that we wanted to work on turn taking, we might write an objective something like, by the end of the month, children will take turns with a toy when they are finished using it. So by the end of the month is the criterion for performance or success, and children taking turns with a toy when they are finished using it is the behavior or the skill that we want to see children exhibit. If we go to our goal example of working on literacy development, a possible objective could be, by the end of the month, children will identify 3 lowercase and 3 uppercase letters. So by the end of the month, again, is our criterion for performance or success. And then the specific literacy skill that we want to work on is children will identify 3 lowercase and 3 uppercase letters, and that is the behavior or the skill. So that's one piece of objectives, and we'll talk a little bit more about them on the next slide. So a lot of times people refer to objectives as being SMART. So we're trying to make sure that objectives have the S, the M, the A, the R, and the T. So if you ever are writing an objective and you need to make sure that it has all the right parts in it, that it's going to be something that someone could actually use in real time to improve a child's developmental abilities, making sure that it has all these SMART components can be very helpful. So one, you want your objective to be specific. It should clearly identify what should be covered and accomplished. So the ones on the previous slide were pretty specific. So when a child is done using a toy, they will give it to someone else versus just vague turn taking. A child will identify 3 uppercase and 3 lowercase letters versus the child will know their letters. That latter one is not specific, but identify 3 uppercase, 3 lowercase is much more specific. It needs to be something that we can measure. If you can't know when it happens, then it's not measurable. So if you say, I want children to understand addition, what will they do? What specifically will they do that you can measure that helps you to know that they have achieved something related to addition? Understanding addition, I don't know when they understand addition, so that would not be measurable. Achievable, that it should be something that children have a shot at actually accomplishing. So one, let's say a child you want them to be less aggressive. You want them to hit other children less often. Well, let's say that child hits other children like 10 times a day, and by the end of the week you don't want them to hit anyone. That's not really very achievable, because that would mean a really huge reduction in the child's current behaviors. Better to say by the end of the week, children will reduce their hitting by 5 or 10%. That's an achievable goal. That's something that can realistically be accomplished in the time period given. I'm going to jump over to T because we're kind of talking about time already, but that is the criterion for performance or success. By when do you want to see this thing happen? How much of it do you want to see happen? So make sure that the time that you're allowing is a reasonable time that allows that objective to be achievable. It also needs to be relevant. So it needs to be something that is within the wheelhouse of the age group of children that you're working with, or within the wheelhouse of the developmental skills of a individual child. So it should be something that is meaningful and relevant to either the age group of the children, each individual child, things that they're interested in, paired to whatever educational gap that you noted. So if you notice that a child was having a hard time comprehending books that are being read to them or that they're reading themselves, and you now have an objective that talks about recognizing letters, that wouldn't really be an appropriate literacy objective. The literacy objective should be something related to what their educational gap actually is, which is comprehending text. So SMART is a great way to think about how to create appropriate objectives. Once you have your goals and objectives settled on and all written out, then you need to start thinking about how you're going to make those goals and objectives happen. So what are you actually going to do with the children that allows you to enact those objectives and then measure them after you've done whatever intervention. So this slide is segueing into kind of over what is the actual intervention going to look like. I figured out what my objective is. Now, how can I provide opportunities and activities that allow children to meet that particular objective? So you need to ask yourself these questions. And I will say that these questions are coming from your Pathways to Play book, which we're going to be talking about on the next slide. Because in addition to having the play checklist, your Pathways to Play book also has a planning form that you can use when working on meeting your goals and objectives. And it includes attention to some of these questions on the form, and also the book itself includes attention to these questions. So I would encourage you to dig into the Pathways to Play readings for this week so that you are up to speed on exactly a little bit more detail on what these questions mean. So when are you going to work on the goal? If you have a social goal, you need to make sure that you work on it at a time when children have access to other children. If you want to work on a literacy goal, it needs to be in the context of books. Is there a particular time of day when children are at their best, or a time of day when they seem to be most enthusiastic about play and activities? So think about the best moment of the day to work on the particular goal and objective that you have. Now, I will say also that your book refers to goals. It does not refer to objectives, but they are actually talking about objectives. They're not really talking about goals. They're talking about objectives. So we've got a little bit of a language issue between what I'm teaching you in class and the book. But whenever you read in the Pathways to Play book goal, just think objective. So what are the child's special interests? Children do better and are able to exhibit higher level skills if we provide them with things they like. So I worked in a classroom one time where there was a little boy who did not like sensory materials, and we determined that this was a form of play that was missing for him, and that this was an important form of play to help him to flesh out. But we also had to think about what does he like, and we realized that he really liked the color green, and he really liked cars. So we thought about what are sensory activities that we can create that include green and cars. So we hid little Hot Wheels in green colored shaving cream. and we let him paint with little cars in green paint. We put green food coloring in the water table. Anything that we could do to lean into his interests to potentially help him to meet the objective that we had laid out for him, which was to engage in more sensory play, because we felt like that was an important kind of play that was missing for this child. How many children will be involved? Some things like turn taking, you really only need one other child, and maybe one other child to begin with is enough. You don't necessarily want to overwhelm children by having a whole bunch there when a child really just needs to work on turn taking with one other child. But maybe what they need to work on is something that requires more children, or maybe they've already had practice with one child and now we need to level up and have more children be involved. Maybe what we're working on is an object play thing and no children need to be involved, because maybe we just need to work on increasing the child's constructive or dramatic play, and we can add people in later on. So be thoughtful about who's going to be participating. Where will the play take place? Is it going to be outside, inside? I kind of already touched on this a little bit with the when, but it's also about setting. So maybe it's inside, but you know that the child really doesn't, like the child will never go to housekeeping. So maybe it needs to take place in housekeeping because that's your objective, is to get them in the housekeeping area. Or maybe you want to increase their constructive play and you know they really like blocks, so you bring them to the block area to raise up the level of block play that they're already engaging on. So when and where are very important. And then finally, what props do you need? So again, back to dramatic play. Maybe you have a child who really likes the blocks, who's really good at constructing interesting block constructions, but you'd like to get them to do a little bit of dramatic play. So maybe the best way is to bring in some props into the block area. Maybe bring in some vehicles or some dollhouse people or some farm animals to see if you can kind of maybe move them over to active agent, where they're pretending that miniatures are alive and doing something. Maybe that's the best way, and those are the best props to get at the particular kind of play that you're looking for. So these are all very important questions when we are trying to make our objectives happen and give children opportunities to meet the specifications that have been developed for those particular objectives. So as I said, your book has a planning form, and you're going to be using this form in one of your homework assignments. Also, as I said, the directions for how to complete the form are very specific and detailed in your Pathways to Play book, so I'm just going to give a quick introduction here. So remember, I did say that your book refers to things as a goal when they actually are objectives. They're not really goals in the sense that we discussed goals in this particular lecture. But when you're filling out the planning form, you're taking the data that you collected on your Pathways to Play checklist. So you observe a child playing with another child in dramatic play, you complete the checklist, and then you identify something on the checklist that the child could use some improvement on. So maybe their persistence in play is lower than we want it to be. So you will take that planning form and you will say, okay, hey, what do I want to do? Like, what objective can I create? What activity would be a good one? What am I going to do to help this child to get where I think they need to go? So maybe the child only plays less than 5 minutes and you want them to play more. So it's probably not reasonable to assume that they're going to play 10 minutes or longer right away. I would encourage you to pick the next one up in that group. And I think it's like 6 to 9 minutes or something like that. So if the child plays 5 or less, I'm going to encourage them to play 6 to 9. So as I'm filling out my planning form, the who is going to be the child. So you're going to put the child's name and the date, and then the who is going to be that same child. The does what is not what they currently do, but what you want them to be doing. So we already said the child plays 5 minutes or less. The next thing up on that number is 6 to 9 minutes. So in the does what, I'm going to put 6 to 9 minutes because that's what I want to see them doing. That's the does what that I want to see soon. Where is that going to happen? I don't know. That's completely up to what you think might be good for the particular child or group of children that you're working with. So it could be inside, outside, the dramatic play area, the block area. That is a decision that you will make. The how well or how often is that criterion for performance or success. So it could be by the end of the day, by the end of the week, by the end of the month, by the end of the school year. It could be if I want them to exhibit more persistence in play, that their persistence in play will improve by 1 minute by the end of the week. Again, that is up to you and what seems reasonable and relevant and useful to the child. And then the by when is going to depend on the how well or how often. So if it's by the end of the week, whatever date you put up in the date part on the top, you would date that for 1 week later. So as you are engaging in the rest of the planning form, you are going to jot down some notes about what the child's special interests are. Is there anything that you need to do to make the activity sensitive to the child's culture and home language? What would an appropriate level of difficulty be? Is any adaptive equipment needed? You're going to circle where it's going to happen, or you're going to write that in. You're going to write down where it will happen, what props and materials are needed, who will be involved. You can see these are the questions from the previous slide. What is the role of the adult? So we are going to be talking about the role of adult in upcoming classes later on down the line, but if you want, there is some information in your Pathways to Play planning book about different roles that adults might take on. But kind of typical roles is, are you going to be playing with the children? Are you going to be providing props and then watching? Are you going to be directing the child? Sort of what is your job going to be in making this objective happen? What data will be collected and how will it be recorded? So you need to collect some data to know whether your objective has been met. That's why it needs to be measurable, because you need to collect data to measure whether that thing happened or not. Are you going to do a running record, an anecdotal record? Are you going to use some sort of checklist? Are you going to reuse the Pathways to Play checklist? Whatever it is that you want to do. And then you are not going to be completing the reflection because you are not going to be doing this lesson. But if you did do this activity that is on this planning form with children, you would be engaging in some reflection of how it went. So you are going to fill out the planning form up to the point of reflection, and then you don't need to fill it out after that. To wrap up this lecture, I would like you to revisit the let's practice that you did on the play observation lecture. So you can see that you have already, hopefully you have already, if you did what you were supposed to do on the previous lecture that I gave to you. You were supposed to watch a video of children engaging in dramatic play. You were supposed to pick one child to focus on while you were watching the video. You were supposed to complete the Pathways to Play checklist after watching the video. So that was your practice for the previous lecture. And now we're going to add on the new task. So you're going to take that checklist that you were practicing with in the previous lecture, and you're now going to use it to complete the Pathways to Play planning form so that you get some practice using all of these tools before you need to complete one of your homework assignments.